So let's go through these reasons here. If A is a right angle and B is a right angle, what can we conclude from this? And the thing we're interested in is that if we know both A and B are right angles, then we can conclude that the measure of angle A is equal to the measure of angle B, or equivalently, we can conclude that angle A is congruent to angle B. Okay? And the reason is that all right angles are congruent. Okay. The second thing to review is that if we're given a diagram such as this, where we have two triangles, and I can see this is probably supposed to be, let's say this is an O, we're not supposed to have the same letter twice, so that's a typo there. But if we have two triangles and they share a common side, then sometimes it's very helpful for us to note that a side is congruent to itself. Okay, so in this case, we will conclude CG is congruent to CG. Its side is congruent to itself, and I should put the symbols on top. This is the same thing as saying that CG equals CG, or that the measure of CG is equal to itself. And the reason is the reflexive property. Okay, I hope you remember that, the reflexive property of equality. Okay, and then finally, we have another situation when we're given that the measure of angle A equals the measure of angle R, and the measure of angle B equals the measure of angle S, and we need to conclude something else from this. Well, what's important here is to realize that if you've got a triangle and you've got two of the angles in one triangle congruent in a respective way to two other angles in the triangle, that means the third angle is also congruent to the third angle. Okay, so if we're given, in this case we were given that angle A is congruent to angle R, and that angle B is congruent to angle S, then we can conclude that angle C is congruent to angle T. Okay, that would be our statement. We can also say that in a way by pointing out that if two corresponding angles are congruent, and this is if two corresponding angles in triangles are congruent, then the third angle is congruent. Okay, so if this isn't intuitively obvious, the reason is because we know that the angles of a triangle have to add up to 180 degrees. Okay, so these angles have to add up to 180, and so do these angles have to add up to 180. So let's see what that means. That means that angle A plus angle B, the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B plus the measure of angle C has to equal to 120. I'm sorry, 180. Did I say 120? 180. And also that the measure of these three angles have to also add up to 180. So that means that the measure of angle R plus the measure of angle S plus the measure of angle T has to equal to 180. And that means they're both equal to each other. If each of them is equal to 180, they're equal to each other. We also know that the measure of angle A is equal to the measure of angle R, and the measure of angle B is equal to the measure of angle S. So that means that we could subtract these two equalities from this equality here, and subtracting measure of angle A from the left, measure of angle R from the right, and now subtracting measure of angle B from the left and measure of angle S from the right leaves us with the fact that the measure of angle C equals the measure of angle T. which is what we concluded. Okay, so because the three angles of a triangle add up to 180, that means these three angles add up to the same amount that these three angles do, and since we know two of them are equal, we could subtract out the two equalities to conclude that the measure of angle C equals the measure of angle T. And all three of these properties we are going to need to use at some point as we move along in proving triangles are congruent.